Hello everyone. In today's lesson we're going to continue multiplying and dividing by 10, 100, or 1000. Now I have written down some more tricky questions compared to what we were doing yesterday. We're going to do these together, but I would like for you to try and solve these on your own first. So pause the video, do these exercises in your notebook, and then come back to see if you've done them correctly. So pause the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, if you're back, that means you solved them, so let's see if you solved them correctly. So here it says 4 times what makes 400? I need to notice that 400 is basically like saying 4, just with a couple of zeros at the end. So I took 4 and I added a couple of zeros at the end. That means that I multiplied by 100. So that's the first one. 53 times what makes 530? 530 is 53, just with another 0 at the end. So I multiplied this by 10, so that I took this and I added a 0 at the end. Then it says, what times 10 makes 820? To see this, to find this, I need to see that this has a 0 at the end, meaning that there was a number here. I multiplied it by 10 and I added this 0. So what would I have if I didn't have this 0? I'd have 82. And 82 times 10 makes 820. Next we move into the decimal points. So we say 5.6 times what makes 5,600. Again, I see this 5, I see this 6, and we have 5.6. So that should immediately tip me off that I've multiplied it by something along the lines of 10, 100, or 1000. If you look closely, you can see that from this to this, what's happened is basically we've moved this decimal point 1, 2, 3 places to the right. It would be here. But again, like we said yesterday, if the decimal point is to the far right and has no more numbers to the right of it, then I can just erase it. So since I moved it 3 places to the right, I multiplied this number by 1000. Next, we have 4.9 times what makes 490. 490 is basically 4.9 with the decimal point moved 1, 2 places to the right. So I multiplied this number with 100. Next up, we have what times 100 makes 50? And this is a bit confusing when you think about it because, well, your immediate thought is 5, that 5 should go here. But if I had 5 here times 100, this should be 500. So it can't be 5. It would have to be 5, but with its decimal point, 1 more place to the left. So here, so this would have to be 0.5. 0.5 times 100 does make 50, because I have to move the decimal point 1, 2 places to the right, and I'd get 50. Next up, we have 6 times 36. What you have to notice here is that I have this number, I multiply it with something, and then it changes. Meaning, it's not that I add zeros at the end or anything, it becomes something completely different. There's no 3 here when I start multiplying with something. So in this case, I have a trap. I have not multiplied this with 10, 100, or 1000. I need to remember my basic timetables. And remember that 6 times 6 makes 36. It's very important not forget what we already know when trying to do this. Just because we're doing something specific doesn't mean we should lose sight of what we already know. So remember, just try and check. 6 times what makes 36? Oh yeah, my timetables. 6 times 6 makes 36. Next up, we have something times 1,000, and it makes 6. Okay, so obviously there was a number here. I multiply it with 1,000, and we have to move it. We have to move its decimal point 3 places to the right, and we get this, which has its decimal point here. So let's see what would happen if we put it back to where it initially was, the decimal point. 1, 2, 3 places to the left, it would be 6. And then the other 2 places would be zeros. In front of them would have to be the decimal point. And of course, in front of that, I'd have to have a 0, because no number starts with a decimal point. So I'd have 0.006 times 1,000. Yes, it does make 6. Then I have what times 10 makes 30. Now again, I could think about this by saying, oh, it's just 3 with a 0 at the end. So this is 3. But also again, I could say, oh yeah, my 10's times tables. So 3 times 10 makes 30. Next up, let's move into the divisions. I have 600 divided by something made into 60. So what I have here is 600, and I cut away one of its zeros, and I'm left with 60. What would make me do that? If I divide by 10. So it's 600 divided by 10 makes 60. Next up, we have 5,000 divided by what makes 50. Here I've taken away 1, 2 zeros, and I'm left with 50. What would make me take away 2 zeros? If I divided by 100. Next up, we have 56. We divide it by something, and it becomes 5.6, which basically means I moved its decimal point 1 place to the left. What would make me do that? Dividing by 10. Next, we have something, a number, we don't know what, but we divide it by 100, and we have to move its decimal point 2 places to the left. We get 7, which has its decimal point here. So that means before I moved it here, it was 2 places to the right. 1, 2. Oh, so that means that here there were 2 zeros. So there was a 7, and then 2 zeros. Now I could put the decimal point here and have 700.0, or as we said in the last lesson, I can just erase it since it has no more numbers to its right. Then I have a number, I divide it by 1,000, and I get 2. So I had this number, I divided it by 1,000, and I moved the decimal point 3 places to the left, and I got 2, which has its decimal point here, meaning that this decimal point was initially 3 places to the right of here, meaning that it was 2, and it had 3 more zeros to its right. Sorry, this doesn't fit. Let's actually rewrite that. So that it fits. Next, we have 35 divided by what makes it into 7. Again, this number is divided, and instead of having something with 3's and 5's over here, I get a 7. Meaning that I didn't divide this by 10, 100, or 1,000. I divided it by another number. And in this case, I need to remember my timetables. and think, what should I divide 35 with to make it into 7? Basically, which multiplication of 7 gives me 35? Well, 7 times 5, so I divided 35 by 5 to turn it into 7. Next up, we have 6.8 divided by what becomes 0.68. In this case, what I've done is I divided 6.8 by a number, and I took its decimal point one place to the left. What would make me do that? Dividing by 10, of course. Next up, we have 7.2. I divide it by something, and it becomes 0.72. Which means, again, I moved the decimal point one place to the left, here in front of the 7. What will make me do that? Again, dividing by 10. Next, I have a number. I divide it by 10, and it becomes 4, meaning that this number had a decimal point. I moved it to the left, and I got 4, which has its decimal point here, meaning that before this, I had 4, and it has a 0 to its right, because if I move this back to its original position, this would become 40. So that's all for today. I hope you have a good weekend, and I'll see you guys on Monday.